Hello. So this is a live stream on verbal abuse, and I just want to say a couple of things to start. So verbal abuse is any kind of interaction that causes you emotional harm. There are many kinds of verbal abuse, and unfortunately, the society we live in is just really full of it to the point where it becomes difficult to recognize when it's happening and whether it's happening or not. So I found this really great book and I've read it like a few years ago. So I just came back to it because people who are being abused usually find themselves again in these situations where they are being abused again. And often we don't realize like how the abuse is happening, whether it's happening or not. And it creates a lot of confusion amongst people. And the thing is, if you've just started out a relationship and it's been a few months and you're already experiencing this verbal abuse, it might be a good idea to start thinking about options outside of the relationship, how to leave that relationship, start distancing yourself, start making a backup plan. I know it's easier said than done. I know there are a lot of considerations that come into it: emotional dependence, financial dependence. You may have kids with this person. If it is a long term thing, you may want to go into counseling and therapy. But my personal opinion is, and this is just my opinion, that usually abuse of this nature is very difficult to change. And after you have put in the effort, the longer the relationship, usually the longer people want to put in the effort to try to save it because they have a lot of memories, they have a lot of um, things that they built together in the relationship that they don't want to give up. But at a certain point, you have to realize that this person is not going to get it. It's not worth your time to keep trying to convince someone who doesn't want to be convinced, who doesn't want to see things your way, who maybe they kind of want to change, but again, when they're in that situation, they go back to their same old patterns. And those patterns are just not working for you because this is the book I wanted to like do a bunch of readings from. It's a really great book. I like it especially because it gives really concrete examples of what you can say. It addresses a lot of issues like cultural conditioning, how abuse affects children in the home, and how you can deal with it, get out of it, seek outside help, what you can do about it, and all the ways it shows up, and all the ways you can sort of manage it and work through it. Um, so I'm just going to start off a little bit by talking about the effects of abuse, and then I'm going to move on to basically like why abuse happens. A lot of it is conditioning of the partner. So I'm going to move on then to like the basic rights in a relationship, and then move on to how to recognize this abuse and how to deal with it. So I want to qualify this by saying that while a lot of people who are abusers are that way because they have been abused themselves, um, at the same time, it doesn't justify, it doesn't it doesn't justify what they're doing, and you don't have to stay in this situation. So yeah. So basically, uh, I want to start out with talking about the effects of the abuse themselves. So, yeah. So the verbal abuser especially undermines the partner's self-perception. So the way I feel like verbal abuse is very insidious, it's very complex, it's very difficult to pinpoint. And when people start asking this question, is this normal? It usually means that there is something up that may not be normal, because it's not normal to feel terrible all the time. It's not normal to be yelled at. It's not normal to be criticized. It's not normal to be called names, to be put down, to be belittled for your thoughts and your ideals, to the point where you feel like you don't exist. You're completely helpless. Um, it just it creates this learned helplessness, which basically undermines our ability to have a normal life. The person who's being abused finds it very difficult eventually to have any sort of positive self image. They find it difficult to sustain work. They find it difficult to have positive relationships. Usually, they become so depressed that they cannot even maintain their outside friendships in the way that they were doing before. They lose interest in the things that they used to do. They lose interest and respect for themselves. So, yeah, so, if the partner is told with gradually increasing frequency that she is illogical, too sensitive, always trying to start an argument, competitive, always has to be right, etc., she, and they use she because unfortunately the paradigms in which we operate, and I'll go into this shortly, but we are conditioned, like men are often conditioned to be the perpetrators while they say they want mutuality and cooperation, and I believe that they do want it. It because of the way society is set up, it is quite difficult for them to often have that reality to be that way towards the, their partner. So, and again, I don't believe this excuses what they're doing, but if it helps people understand, that's great. That person may have been abused themselves, they may have been in a difficult situation their entire lives. But again, if you feel this is happening on a persistent basis, you might want to look into what's happening, because usually the abuse just gets worse over time. And usually it starts off with the little things, with statements like, why aren't you understanding what I'm saying before you start a fight again? You're too sensitive, you're irrational, you always want to fight, you don't understand me, you don't let me speak. And the person who is the partner usually believes that if they could change their behavior, if they could do something that they're doing wrong, that they're actually angering the person, then the relationship can get better. And over time, the partner keeps adjusting and adjusting more, to the point where they feel like completely lost. They don't have their self respect or self esteem intact at all. And that can become really difficult. So, she may become conditioned to accept more and more abuse while experiencing more and more self doubt. This conditioning is like brainwashing. It may extend beyond herself to her family, her interests, and her most cherished ideals. So, an example is, consider the case of Leia. So her partner Luke constantly presented to me that I had a flaky family. He did this in subtle ways. I gradually began to think he was in touch with the real world and I and my family weren't. I became confused. Actually, when I thought about my relatives, I realized they were highly respected and made real contributions to society. Still, I felt like there was something wrong with my background, like his family was more solid. Actually, now I can see that none of this was true. It was like brainwashing. So it just kind of works like the way a narcissist does, but unfortunately, because of the amount of abuse in our society, we pick up things we learn in our family of origin, our environment, and um, because our environment is toxic, it can really go deep into our psyche and become like the default form of what we're doing. So Denise Wynn, author of The Manipulated Mind, tells us that with regard to brainwashing or psychological coercion, social psychological factors and unconscious conditions combine to create powerful influencing forces on our lives and on their own. So the victims of brainwashing had certain experiences in common. So these experiences were, and this is from page 35 from Win 83, their certainty was undermined, their behavior was shaped by the use of rewards and other conditioning. So you kind of like start distrusting your own reality. People usually make allowances for their partners. They say, oh, because he has been abused, because he is going through a tough time with his health or his finances, he's not that bad. Sometimes he just loses it. His Sometimes it just appears that he's going off, but his bark is worse than his bite. All sorts of explanations. Denial is really common in people who are going through this. So they were led to believe that no one at home cared what happened to them. They felt out of control and learned helplessness. Public humiliation served to undermine their egos. Need for friendship and approval led them to comply. Induced anxiety, guilt, fear, and insecurity led to suggestibility. The unpredictability of their captors' behavior confused their expectations and assumptions. Without a norm to which they could adapt, they felt even less in control. So, apart from the cultural conditioning, the day to day abuse also conditions the partner, of course. So, if you don't recognize the abuse, you may not have any idea that you are being abused, which is mostly how it works. When something is unnamed and is seen by no one else, it has an aura of unreality about it because that partner may be very nice one minute and very like toxic, yelling at them the next. It often makes the person feel that there is like it must have been something they did, and over time they start taking on more of the blame and not realizing that maybe it's the other person who's being irrational. Then all verbal abuse is irrational. So, so the partner is conditioned by our family of origin, culture, relationship. All of us have conditioning, and we adapt. And our conditioning influences the way we interpret our experience. Part of conditioning is adapting. In other words, conditions may change around us, and we adapt very gradually. We don't notice gradual changes. This is how most people adapt to verbal abuse. They slowly adapt until they become used to the environment, which is killing their spirit, but they don't realize that it is that way because it's like a slow burn. It just gets worse over time. So, um, so primarily the partner is conditioned to believe that her mate is rational toward her. This conditioning begins in early childhood. Who has not heard you have nothing to cry about, said either to herself or to someone else? Even if a parent must refuse his child another piece of candy and the child cries, the child might be comforted. I know you miss it and want it, yet I cannot give it to you. Thus, the child learns early in her father's arms to grieve her losses rather than to believe that the irrational you have nothing to cry about is rational, real, and logical. So the partner is conditioned from early childhood not to trust her feelings and not to recognize the irrationality of verbal abuse. All verbal abuse is irrational. In the context of war, the rationality of which is questionable, there may be a certain rationality to a verbal attack. In the context of a relationship, verbal abuse is irrational and the verbal abuser is behaving irrationally. So the partner's belief that her mate is being rational and that it must be her fault really plays into this. So, the partner's belief in the rationality of her mate is a primary assumption arising from and maintained by complex and diverse factors, not the least of which are her very early childhood experiences. So, Young said this particular thing, and Young is like, I really love his work. He's done so much work on the subconscious. He's gone he's gone into talking about dreams. He's gone into just like completely dedicating himself completely cutting off from the entire world and going into subconscious. And he kind of said that I would just like get lost in my own subconscious unless I design my day around doing like physical tasks that help me get out of that mental state. So I kind of feel with like creative people and artists the same, where you just kind of get lost unless you balance your life out. So I digress. Um, so Yeah, deep in our own psyche, there is the conditioning of generations. Young describes the patterning principle, which organizes our thinking, a way of perceiving as an archetype. So Young talks a lot about archetypes, which is like a sort of representation of a man and the associated characteristics that we have in our mind with that. So the archetype or primary image of the masculine has been considered to be that of logos, reason or logic. Irrationality has been projected upon and identified with woman, the feminine. Consequently, the partner may believe that her mate is the rational one and that she is the irrational one in the relationship. So, if the abuser denies his abusive behavior, saying it never happened or saying that what his partner has said or done is the reason for it, the partner may look for rationality, believing that her mate is logical. She may think there must be some reason he's angry at me, or there must be some reason he thinks my work is not important, or there must be some reason he thinks I'm trying to start an argument. The belief that her mate is behaving logically is one of the primary causes of the partner's confusion. He may hold the door for her at one moment and scream at her when she answers a question the next moment. These rapid changes from rational to irrational behavior not only increases her confusion but may also result in her increased determination to make some rational sense of it. So, over time, this kind of conditions us to be the way we are. And so, basic rights in a relationship. So besides understanding how abuse shows up and how we can deal with it, it is useful to understand the basic rights of relationships which are violated by verbal abuse. So following is a list of some of these rights. Um, so the right to goodwill from the other, the right to emotional support, the right to be heard by the other and to be responded to with courtesy, the right to have your own view, even if your mate has a different view, the right to have your feelings and experience acknowledged as real, the right to receive a sincere apology for any jokes you find offensive, for clear, informative answers to questions that concern what is legitimately your business, to live free from accusation and blame, to live free from criticism and judgment, to have your work and your interests spoken of with respect, to encouragement, to live free from emotional and physical threat, to live free from angry outbursts and rage. So this includes if this person is like uh, directing it towards you or other things, like it could be directed at animals, could be directed at children, could be just to show you that if you don't comply, this is what's going to happen to you. The person may not be aware that they're doing it, but they are doing it, and it is affecting you. So, the right to be called by no name that devalues you, the right to be respectfully asked rather than ordered. If there is safety and respect within your relationship and goodwill, other issues can be addressed. Until the issue of verbal abuse and the abuser's underlying need for power over is resolved, little progress, if any, can be made in the relationship. If there is no verbal abuse, there is openness and a willingness to discuss the hopes, fears, desires, needs, and expectations of both parties. Uh, so, this author kind of, the way she sees it is basically how the reason why a lot of abuse is happening and why people are confused by it is because they don't understand per se that they are living in another reality. Uh, they are living in another reality, and the other person is living in another reality. Uh, yeah. So, um, so I'm going to go into that shortly. I want to talk about the underlying dynamics, some reasons why. So, childhood experiences of the partner. In childhood, the typical partner lived in reality one, where the power adults have over children was misused, often through ignorance and often with the best of intentions. Dominance and power over prevailed, and so did verbal abuse. Many of the partner's feelings could neither be validated nor accepted. She had an indifferent, absent, uninvolved, or angry father. Primary caretakers, relatives, or teachers were verbally abusive. In spite of all this, there seems to have been one decisive circumstance which allowed the partner to move towards the second reality, which is built on mutual support, cooperation, empathy, creativity, collaboration. And reality one is the one based on domination, fear, power, trying to win arguments, trying to be right, trying to intimidate the other person, whether of course that a lot of people are not conscious of their abuse, and a lot of people will never come around to admitting it because they don't really understand what's happening, or they may not even do that because they're not the ones being affected by it. So the difference may have been that in childhood she did have some sympathetic witness to her experience. Some thread still connected her to the knowledge that she suffered and that something was wrong. But what? But what? To her, the all-powerful adults were not wrong. How could they be? They were godlike to her infant eyes. Her only alternative was to believe that something must be wrong with the way she was, how she expressed herself, how she came across, or possibly with her feelings and experience of reality itself. So she might have been in both realities, or she might be in the second reality, but without the self esteem to back her up. She knew that she suffered, she could therefore feel empathy and compassion for others. She wanted mutuality and understanding. The only thing she did not know was why she suffered, and as kids, we kind of blame ourselves and we say that it must be something I did, and that kind of goes over to the abusive dynamic where you keep feeling that if I do something differently, the abuse will stop. Surely the one who said he loved her would not be so upset with her, would not yell at her, not tell her what was wrong with her, unless there was something wrong with the way she was or how she came across. She easily believed that she might have said or done something inadvertently or unconsciously that hurt her mate just as she was hurting. She searched her soul for answers, and surely she thought he did also. The last thing she would ever have imagined was that he could not search for answers because he could not share her reality. We know that verbal abuse occurs to some extent uh, in all but the most ideal of childhoods, leaving most with some uncertainty, some self doubt. This self doubt is what greatly increases in an abusive relationship. For example, when the partner hears you're taking it all wrong, or you're just trying to be right, what she said had heard in childhood is reiterated in adulthood, but this time without a sympathetic witness, this time behind closed doors. Um, Clearly, when there is no witness to one's experience and no validation of one's reality, one one must rely solely one must rely solely upon one's own feelings and judgment. This is difficult for anyone. It is doubly difficult for the partner because the abuse itself diminishes her ability to trust her own feelings and her own judgment. Her feelings and judgment are constantly condemned by the abuse. The victim of abuse is taught to believe that although she is hurting, she shouldn't be, or that she is in some way responsible. From childhood, she is conditioned not to understand her feelings and so not to recognize the truth. This truth is that she is being accused and blamed for the abuse, as if could be justified, for feeling bad about it, as if her feelings were wrong. The typical partner believed the abuser's denial and so became frustrated and confused even while she searched for answers. Unable to reach clarity and understanding, the partner was left with feelings of inadequacy and confusion. Uh, this is like very common to feel confused and more lost, not knowing whether you're the fault, what the problem is, not knowing whether you should leave or stay, not knowing. what is going on, not feeling emotionally balanced, and feeling more and more fragmented and vulnerable and confused, and then that being used by the partner to make you feel like you're more irrational. If her maid was not wrong, if he was not lying, if she did take things wrong, then she could believe only that something must be wrong with the way she was, how she expressed herself, how she came across, or possibly with her feelings and experience of reality itself. Thus, the doubts of childhood rose up once more. She kept her mind open to what she might hear that would reveal what was wrong, why she suffered. She became, therefore, the perfect victim. The suffered many wrongs to her spirit, and she did not know the meaning of her pain. However, because she remained aware of her feelings, she was connected to the spirit of life at her center, the source of her personal power. Eventually, it was the power of her feelings and the knowledge of her spirit which enabled her to recognize the abuse, and in so doing, gain the self esteem that she wanted in her reality. So the childhood experiences of the abuser. So that was like the partner and what they went through. So this is kind of about what the abuser probably went to. So they grew up in the same reality where power over and dominance prevailed, and hence so did verbal abuse. Also, as was the case with the partner, many of his feelings were neither validated nor accepted. However, unlike the partner, he had no compassionate witness to his experience. Without a compassionate witness, he could conclude only that nothing was wrong. If nothing was wrong at all, then all his painful feelings must not exist. Automatically, he stopped feeling his painful feelings. He closed them off from awareness as one would close a door, and he did not know what he suffered. In this way, he closed the door on a part of himself. He became used to that reality. And just as Hitler modeled his behavior after that of his brutal father, so too the abuser modeled his behavior after his childhood abusers. He became adept at verbal abuse. Without the knowledge of his feelings, of what he suffered, he could not experience empathy and compassion, and so could not cross the threshold into that other reality built on mutuality and respect. This reality was now behind closed doors. The absence or presence of a helping witness in childhood determines whether a mistreated child will become a despot who turns his repressed feelings of helplessness against others, or an artist who can tell about his or her suffering. So often, people who are abusive have been through similar circumstances. They may have been extreme neglect, they may have been psychologically tortured in a way that is merciless and cruel, and it might have really like stunted their ability to recognize what was happening in themselves and to not further perpetuate that abuse later on in life. Since the abuser feels justified in his behavior and seems to have no comprehension of its effects, we can assume only that he is acting out his repressed feelings and is therefore acting compulsively. Abusers seek power over because they feel helpless. The helpless, painful feelings of childhood that must not exist and must not be felt do exist, and if not felt, are acted out. A long time ago in the abuser's childhood, he closed the door on these feelings. To survive in childhood, he could do no less. His feeling self, nonetheless, lived on behind closed doors. This feeling child within was, psychologically speaking, locked away in a tomb of agony. The longer the child within is unrecognized, the more enraged it becomes, and consequently, the more rage the abuser acts out. Alice Miller tells us, as long as this child within is not allowed to become aware of what happened to him or her, a part of his or her emotional life will remain frozen, and sensitivity to the humiliations of childhood will therefore be dulled. So this acts as like a defense mechanism. It acts as like our brain protecting ourselves. It helps us survive. We kind of develop this counter personality, which is really strong, which doesn't get affected, which is like can endure a lot of pain, can have like this black poker face. But inside, of course, there is another story happening altogether, which is also what happens with narcissists. It happens with all kinds of people who have been abused, that they develop this kind of alternate personality that they put on especially around other people, but it's very hard to not have that in relationships that are close because it just feels safer to be that way, especially if you felt unsafe your entire life. So, mm, all appeals to love, solidarity, and compassion would be useless if this crucial prerequisite of sympathy and understanding is missing. Typically, even though the partner tries to explain to her mate what bothers her, the abuse continues. Appeals to the abuser's compassion are fruitless because the abuser is not empathetic. As Alice Miller points out, a sympathetic and understanding witness to a child's suffering is a crucial prerequisite to empathy in adulthood. Without empathy, the abuser cannot be sensitive to his partner's anguish. He acts out his repressed feelings, doing to another what was done to him in his childhood. Since he cannot feel his feelings, he must act them out. This is what compels him to perpetuate the abuse. Even so, his feelings of pain and powerlessness, harbored since childhood, are never dispelled. They only increase, and so also does the abusive behavior. Each specific instance of abuse does, however, momentarily alleviate the abuser's hidden feelings of pain and powerlessness. So it kind of is like they're like a pressure cooker that is like boiling all the time. Sometimes it boils over and then it kind of like releases some of its tension and then it dies down for a while. And that's kind of why they're doing it because it gives them an emotional payoff relief, makes them feel good, it distracts them from their own feelings. His need to keep the overwhelming pain that must not exist at bay is an underlying dynamic force which compels him to seek power over, control, dominance, superiority. In addition to feeling powerless, abusers have a deeply buried feeling of guilt for having separated from their mothers. It is generally recognized that the infant, male or female, first identifies with the mother. It is the male only, however, who must completely break free from this identification to become other than female. The severing of this bond may result in feelings of guilt, especially if the mother son relationship is not psychologically sound. If these feelings are unresolved, the male may deem himself superior to that which he rejects and may hold in contempt all that is ascribed to the feminine. In this way, he may attempt to justify his separation from his mother and so assuage his guilt. In general, we may assume that the abuser has closed off and denied a complex and diverse assemblage of feelings. So, the relationship with the primary caretaker, especially the mother, is really important. And especially if you're a man, differentiating, individuating yourself from your mother can involve a lot of like rejection, especially if you do not have a stable, loving relationship with that parent. Um, The abuser is closed off, denied complex and diverse assemblage of feelings. If his feelings are denied, he himself is denied. Who then is the abuser? To others, he is hard to get to really know. To himself, he is who he thinks he is, an ideal image he takes himself to be. The abuser's sense of self is not grounded in the feelings of his being, but is instead a fragile construction of mind devoid of personal power. It's kind of like the ego becomes the main person and the main actor, and the ego identifies with a lot of things, with being male, with being female, with being rich, with being educated, with being like belonging to a certain social class. But it's not like it doesn't represent what we really feel, what we really are, what we really believe. Personal power is felt as the ability to know, to choose, and to create from the ground of one's being, that is, from the awareness of one's true feelings. Without personal power, the abuser constantly seeks to feel power over. He feels dominant, of higher status, or superior to his partner when he is abusive. Some abusers even seem to crave the euphoria of power over. Not only does the abuser hide his feelings from himself, but he also hides his abusive behavior from himself. His ideal image denies the reality of his motivations, his compulsions, and his actions. For example, an extremely tense, angry, and explosive abuser may describe himself as easygoing and relaxed. A critical, judging abuser may describe himself as accepting of everyone, taking people as they come. An undermining and trivializing or coldly indifferent abuser may describe himself as supportive of everything his partner does. And a countering, discounting abuser may describe himself as very open to differing views. Many verbal abusers describe themselves in the positive light of all of the above while they indulge in all categories of abuse. So, the confirmed abuser can define himself and the interpersonal reality so convincingly that the partner may accept its definitions. Such acceptance and trust increase her confusion. Because, like, especially if we've been abused, we form this other image of ourselves that we project to the world to keep our own selves safe because we don't know how to deal or how to survive in that toxic, abusive, disrespectful environment. We project to people that things don't bother us, that we're okay, that because we feel no one is going to listen to us, and especially if we have not had someone who can tell us that that pain was real, to feel it for us, to be sympathetic at times to us in a consistent way, it just becomes like more easy to deny that that ever happened. So many partners reported that their mates' images or person over persona shifted over time and in different circumstances. Sometimes he's Mr. Joviality. Sometimes he's Mr. Pontificating, thinking a lot. Sometimes he's Mr. Automaton, just on autopilot. Sometimes he's Mr. Raging. But to most people, he's Mr. Nice Guy. The abuser's loss of his feeling self and consequent feelings of powerlessness usually compel him to increasing self aggrandizement and a correspondingly greater disparagement of his partner. However, he cannot, by abuse, bring his stifled feeling self to life. Since he mistakes excitement for aliveness and triumph for strength, he remains in constant need of bolstering this ideal image. Basically, verbal abusers who become physically abusive do not see themselves as abusive even when they are arrested. The abuser's denial arises out of the conflict between who he thinks he is and his compulsion to act abusively. So his mind kind of rejects that this is not even possible. This denial is a defense against the shattering of his ideal image and an impending identity crisis. His very identity would be at stake if he were to admit to what he was doing. This is why verbal abusers do not sincerely apologize. A strong person can acknowledge weakness. A confident person can acknowledge mistakes. One who really feels weak and inferior inside cannot do so. Since abusive men secretly feel very weak, they work even harder at denying their feelings, projecting them onto available others, the most available being their wives. Of course. The confirmed abuser identifies with, believes he is his ideal image. Consequently, he cloaks his behavior in self righteous denial. You might compare the abuser to the Wizard of Oz. Uncloaked, he is no longer a horrendous force of power over others, but an unsure, frightened person. This does not mean, however, the partner can help him. Hitler, too, was an abused child acting out his repressed feelings as an adult, as Alice Miller's book For Your Own Good so clearly demonstrates. The abuser often supports his ideal image by gaining agreement from others. He will let slip in the natural course of conversation how supportive and appreciative he is of his partner. There's no wonder that many verbally battered women have been told how lucky they are to have such a wonderful mate. Thus far, we have considered the abuser's separation from his feeling self and his consequent need to construct a mental picture and ideal image of himself. What happens to all those painful feelings that must not exist? As we will see, they are projected upon his partner. As time passes, the typical abuser is more and more unwilling to face himself and the pain of his feelings. His anger, fear, self loathing grow in a secret, hidden part of himself. And since he hides this part of himself from himself, he is unable to recognize the source of these feelings. Because this has been going on for like decades in that person, the longer it goes on, the more it becomes difficult to handle and manage. Uh, Through this projection, he will accuse his partner of all that he does and blame her for all the abuse that she suffers. Of course, just projecting that onto the other person, that they are creating fights, that they are creating this trauma, tension for them, always victimizing. This is kind of what being with a narcissist was like. They were always blaming me for cutting them off, not letting them speak, not just like interrupting them all the time. and projecting everything that they did onto me, blaming me for being the abuser and then them for being the victim. Basically, denial and projection of like the next order, because people who have severe abuse develop ways of coping and being in the world that are severely dysfunctional, which affects their ability to be successful in all areas of life. But uncovering those can be quite difficult and can be a very time consuming, exhausting process, especially for people they're with, their children, who can be affected in the long run constantly on a daily basis by their abuse, even as they're getting better. I don't mean to just like shun these people. Of course, they are human beings, they deserve to be given respect, they deserve to get treatment, but at the same time, you may not deserve to be put in this situation that affects you, because the effects of psychological and verbal abuse can go on for the rest of your life, basically, that you have to deal with that as well after you leave such a relationship. And the longer the relationship lasts, or the more severe the abuse, usually you have to deal with it longer. She then becomes as he once was, wounded and without a witness to her wounding. To the abuser, his partner is an extension of himself. When he sees her, he is reminded of his own dark feelings, his own vulnerability, the feelings that must not exist, the feelings that must be controlled. Consequently, his partner becomes the object of his control, and this control becomes her oppression. To paraphrase Matthew Fox in the film The Burning Times, where there is oppression, there is projection, and out of projection comes denial. Deep down, the abuser fears his abandoned feeling child within as if it were too awful to ever be accepted. They may feel angry at their vulnerability, they may feel like they want to hide it, and it may be like very difficult for them to feel any empathy for themselves. This feeling of awfulness seems, however, not to come from him but from his partner. Many partners said that when they told their mates that they felt hurt, their mates reacted to accusations such as, "Now you're saying I'm an awful person, now you're attacking me, this is projection." So when you try to reason with the person who is abusing you, often they say that you start trying to start a fight, you're attacking me, you always do this, you're saying I'm horrible, why are you saying this? So they kind of become the victim and they project onto you the fact that you're an oppressor because you're just trying to explain to them that this behavior is not okay. um, a non-abusive mate would express deep concern and would apologize or would talk of the matter with empathy and understanding. Imagine, if you will, one the whose entire psychological orientation is based upon venting the rage of his feeling self, establishing a sense of power through power over, bolstering his ideal image, his mental construction of who he is, and defending himself from all knowledge of what he is doing by projecting his feelings onto his partner. This is what the abuser does. His life becomes a battle against the one who carries his projection. From his stance, she, like his feeling self, must not exist. He cannot see her for who she is, nor can he see her reality. Let us consider verbal abuse in the light of what we now know about the abuser's closed off feeling self. His ideal image, his projection, and his denial. It becomes evident that every abuse is an attempt by the abuser to defend himself from his inner child's feelings of anger, fear, helplessness, and to protect himself from the knowledge of what he is doing. With this in mind, let us briefly review the categories of verbal abuse. And from this, we can see that all who seek power over do so to defend and protect themselves from their own repressed feelings of personal powerlessness. So, verbal abuse as a defense and protection. Withholding. Withholding enables the abuser to dominate his partner while keeping his ideal image intact. Indeed, to reveal a thought would give the enemy the advantage or perhaps subject him to scrutiny. Excuse me. His ideal image is too fragile a construction to risk such exposure. To respond with interest to his partner would be just as threatening. Such a response would suggest equality, obliterating the abuser's stance of superiority. Without a stance of superiority for protection, the abuser's feelings of powerlessness that must not be felt might be felt. Withholding makes that person feel more in control, more in power, if he can remain distant from his partner and keep her at bay and yearning. Experiences a heightened sense of power if his partner's enthusiasm is dampened by his coldness. So if you are getting excited and this person is irritated and this is happening a lot, and it might not be when you're talking about something serious, because then joking about it might not be appropriate. It usually isn't until unless you've like resolved that issue, because it just kind of makes it seem that it's not important if you're joking while someone is trying to explain something to you. And this is exactly a lot of the time narcissists do that. It's just kind of like the same thing. So they feel more powerful if their partner's enthusiasm or what they're trying to communicate is dampened. And usually people who are partners with such people just try to spend their all their energy trying to convince this person that this is what's happening, so they see it that way. But then eventually they realize that they might realize that it's not going to happen. But usually people stay in these dynamics and get more and more disempowered over time. His power over is in order to protect and defend himself from his own feelings of inadequacy. So the abuser defends himself against his overwhelming feelings of powerlessness by countering his partner. When he declares himself to be right and his partner to be wrong, he believes himself to be the winner, more powerful, and in control. So for this person, it's like a winning match, and it's hard not to be in that situation. All of us have these traits to a certain extent. I've also realized that in previous relationships, I was trying to win arguments. I was trying to win the scoreboard to keep using, like, if a person is trying to tell me I didn't like this, to keep throwing things at them, like, oh, I don't like when at my birthday party you start screaming at me in front of my friends. So it's just kind of like trying to create this scoreboard to make the other person feel like you have done worse things, that you're not a saint, that it's not just me, it's you too, and just taking the arguments in circles that don't get anywhere. Rather than focusing on that particular thing and addressing that other thing, they're using it as leverage to make you feel bad and to make you stop arguing, and just to negate whatever was agreed on in the past. It's more about winning. To say I think or I believe or my view is would remove the possibility of winning over and would open the possibility of two differing views or experiences both being okay. The abuser cannot tolerate this because if the partner has a different view from him, he is no longer in control. He has an overwhelming need to control his partner because she carries his projection. If he does not feel that he is in control, his entire reality is shaken. The abuser gives himself permission to act out his repressed feelings and at the same time protects his ideal image by discounting the effects of his abusive behavior. Discounting is a primary defense. Discounting is basically to take down the value, to be like, this is not such a big deal. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of it. I don't know why you're so concerned about this. I don't know why you don't stop talking about it, even though the abuse itself is not changing, but they are kind of intimidating you to shut up and be okay with it. Blocking and diverting are other defenses by which the abuser controls the interpersonal reality. By totally avoiding the topic at hand, he avoids any exploration of the reality of his behavior. Consequently, he maintains this ideal image and alleviates his hidden feelings of powerlessness. The need to control the conversation and hence the outcome may be so intense that some abusers may say with angry apprehension, I don't see where this conversation is going, so just drop it. And oftentimes, people are abusive, they kind of pretend to have remorse, but it's not real. They're not agreeing with you. They say things will change, but it's just like because losing that person that they're projecting all their garbage onto makes them feel powerless and unworthy again. So they try to get them back through false promises, through promises of change, but because they know that the other person wants them back, because they try to create hope, because they say that if I do this one more time, You can leave, but they kind of know that they can sort of influence that person emotionally and make them keep coming back. So they kind of know that they can get away with it, and that's kind of when the abuse starts happening in its first place. Initially, like, everything is going really well, everything is charming and beautiful, and the relationship itself could be very positive or too positive, even that this person is not coming forward with any complaints or anything that they want to talk about that is bothering them. And over time, little by little, gradually, the abuse starts. The abuser avoids responsibility, maintains an ideal image by declaring his partner guilty, responsible for his feelings. For example, when he attacks her, it is because of her. In this way, he justifies the abuse to himself. So, another way the abuser attempts to defend himself against his hidden feelings of inferiority and powerlessness is by criticizing and judging. By declaring superiority and rightness, he reinforces his ideal image and his entire defense system. Then, abuse may be disguised as a joke, a way of winning, which gives the abuser power. It is a covert, hostile attack, done surreptitiously like guerrilla fighting, denied by the ready made accusation, "you can't take a joke." This accusation blames the victim and leaves the abuser feeling one up and therefore more powerful. It is a no risk pot shot. The damage is done before the partner can see it coming. Winning is assured, and the enemy, the projection, is put down once more. So, other ways are trivializing, undermining, threatening, name calling, by trivializing what the partner is trying to say. This could be by joking, this could be by ignoring, or by saying like things like, "Can we not talk about this right now because it's not that important?" Stuff like that, where trivializing is like making it less important, making it trivial. Undermining to um, challenge the legitimacy and credibility of. Threatening, name calling, uh, are all defenses against repressed feelings of inadequacy and powerlessness. They are power plays designed by the abuser to denigrate and diminish his partner, his projection. When the abuser's projection is pervasive, he treats his partner as if she were an extension of himself, the glove on his hand, under his control, there to follow orders. As long as he maintains control of his projection, he feels defended and protected from his own feelings. Okay, so by forgetting, the abuser denies responsibility for his behavior while acting out his hostility. In this way, he protects his ideal image, maintains his defenses. All forms of abuse deny the hurt in a child and the acting out of its hostility. The abuser's denial perpetuates his identification with his ideal image, maintains his projections upon his partner, and is a means of avoiding responsibility for his behavior and for its consequences. Unless he is willing to look into himself, he will not perceive his lack. If he does look into himself, he will confront his own beast in the jungle, a life spent not in living, but in keeping his feelings at bay. So, unless he actively seeks personal change through the hard work of therapy, he will to some degree have lived a non life, have been to some degree only an idea of himself. This is his own great personal tragedy. So, other things that make verbal abuse worse are often stress from unemployment, uncertainty, personal losses. Rather than bonding couples together so that they deal with the problems, such stress can split them apart. The relationship usually worsens when outside adverse circumstances affect a verbally abusive relationship. So, women all over the world have told me that their spouses have been angrier, colder, more accusatory, more blaming when faced with a failure or even just the potential of one. In either case, somehow the partner is blamed or in some way held responsible. Why? Because verbal abusers perceive their partners to be responsible for all their unhappiness. Thus, they are more likely to be angrier, more silent, more blaming, accusatory, demanding, threatening. Even more significantly, they are unlikely to discuss problems in a rational way with their partners because they don't usually really perceive their partners as separate people, but rather as an all needs meeting extensions of themselves, or as simply an all needs meeting mother. If they've had financial losses, mom should make everything okay again. Why isn't she making it okay? Why isn't she doing that? It's all her fault. If a family member has passed away, she should make them feel better. Finally, stressful events leave verbal abusers more beside themselves and therefore more deeply merge into their partners. Anxiety grows when their partners do not match their projected selves. They expect their partners to divine what to say, to to like magically know and do what they want them to without communicating it, even perceive what they, the abusers, think and require. You know what I want, what I said, what you did, etc. If a verbal abuser talked to his partner as if she were a true equal in the relationship, he would be acknowledging her personhood, her separateness, her self. This would feel like suicide to the abuser because he is projected into her. She is the rest of him. She is his feminine side. She is his unintegrated side. If he talks with her in a real way, he loses half or more of himself. Consequently, instead of discussing fears, feelings, and working with their partners to find solutions, abusers exacerbate the problem, creating more anxiety and stress within the relationship. If they have children, the abuser's behavior also has a negative effect on them. This rationale explains why the abuser doesn't turn to the partner for emotional support, but instead becomes more abusive. Controlling personality does not seek emotional support from the partner, but rather blames the partner for the problem. He gets angrier or increases his losses by denying reality. On the partner of an overt verbal abuser usually does raging, shouting, name calling, or a covert, insidiously undermining verbal abuser can't take it anymore. Divorce is often the only escape. This is especially true when the partner is too traumatized to stay despite promises of change. Of course, if children are involved, custody issues can prove shockingly difficult. Until the partner has a name for what is happening, she may feel she is responsible for not doing, speaking, or acting the right way, since all abuse carries some kind of anger and blame with it. So, abuse increases with loss and uncertainty. Some women have found that the respite from abuse that occurred when their spouses were working outside the home disappeared when they lost their jobs and ended up at home all day. So, often when you acknowledge this abuse, it gets worse. Um, of course, the person is not necessarily going to be amenable to accepting because of all the reasons we just talked about. So, moving on, let's go back to. Uh, mm, okay, so here's like a checklist that you can consult by George Bach and Ronald Dweck in their book "Stop You Me Driving Me Crazy." So, of value in teaching recognition of this crazy making experience is the following checklist. Number one, feeling temporarily thrown off balance, momentarily unable to right oneself, feeling lost, not knowing where to turn, searching aimlessly. Number three, being caught off guard. Number four, feeling disconnected, confused, disoriented. Number five, feeling off balance, as if the rug had been pulled from under one's feet. Number six, receiving double messages, but somehow unable or fearful to ask for clarification, or asking for clarification but not getting it. Number seven, feeling generally bugged by the simple presence of a person. Number eight, to discover that one was mistaken in one's evaluation of where one stood or what it was all about. Of course, none of these are conclusive, but if a lot of them are happening together, it might mean that you are in this situation. Number nine, feeling totally unprepared for a broken promise or unfulfilled expectation. Number 10, experiencing the shattering of an important dream. Number 11, where one assumed goodwill, ill will seems to prevail. Number 12, one feels pushed around, not in control of one's own direction. Number 13, unable to get off, redundantly spinning circles of thoughts. Number 14, what seemed clear becomes muddled. Number 15, an uneasy, weird feeling of emptiness. Number 16, a strong wish to get away, yet feeling unable to move, as if frozen. So a lot of people freeze when they're being abused, and then later on, it becomes the way they kind of act in these situations. Um, Feeling vaguely suspicious that something is wrong. One is befuddled, not able to attack the problem. Number 16, a strong wish to get away, yet, yeah. So, number 17, befuddled. Number 18, vaguely suspicious something is wrong. Number 19, feeling that one's objective world has become chaotic. You may recognize some of these, others you may not recognize. Generally, the responsibility for recognizing verbal abuse rests with the partner of the abuser because the abuser is not motivated to change. Of course, the partner may have difficulty recognizing the abuse, For example, if she feels hurt or upset by anything a mate has said and she expresses her feelings, saying, I felt bad when you said that. The verbal abuser, instead of recognizing her feeling and responding appropriately, will reject and invalidate her feeling by saying something like, I don't know what you're talking about, you're too sensitive. The partner then doubts her own perception. Why? In childhood, like many, she may have been taught that her feelings were to be ignored. Feelings, however, are essential to our being because they are the criteria by which we determine if something is wrong or unsafe. When the partner can recognize and validate her feelings, she can begin to recognize verbal abuse. In other words, she might say, I feel hurt, I am being hurt. I feel diminished, I am being diminished. I feel unrecognized, I am being unrecognized. I feel ignored, I am being ignored. I feel made fun of, I am being made fun of. I feel discounted, I am being discounted. I feel closed off, I am being closed off. You can fill this in, I feel this, and I am being this dash. If the partner shares their feelings with the perpetrator of the aggression, you can be absolutely certain he will invalidate them, at least at first. He may be sarcastic, and then when she protests, tell her it was a joke. The partner may then doubt the truth of her own perceptions. However, the very impression of truth is likely to be perceived not from another's vision, but from one's own. So, there is like another evaluation you can use as a checklist to help you determine if you are experiencing verbal abuse in a relationship. Mark off which ones. This is from the same book. Oh, this is from this book actually. So number one, he seems irritated or angry with you several times a week or more, although you hadn't meant to upset him. You are surprised each time. He says he's not mad when you ask him what he's mad about, or he tells you in some way that it's your fault. When number two, so it's obviously okay to be irritated, to be angry, but it all depends on the way you're expressing it. If over time you're constantly undermining your partner, you're constantly becoming really aggressive, that usually means that there is something else going on. So, crazy making is a form of interpersonal interaction that results from repressing intense aggression and which seriously impairs the victim's capacity to recognize and deal with interpersonal reality. So, when you feel hurt and try to discuss your upset feelings with him, you don't feel as if the issue has been fully resolved. So, you don't feel happy and relieved, nor do you have the feeling that you've kissed and made up. He says you're just trying to start an argument or in some other way expresses his refusal to discuss the situation. Number three, you frequently feel perplexed, frustrated by his responses because you can't get him to understand your intentions. Number four, you're upset not so much about concrete issues, how much time to spend with each other, where to go on vacation, but more about the communication style in the relationship and what was actually communicated, what he thinks you said and what you heard him say. You sometimes wonder, number five, what's wrong with me? I shouldn't feel so bad. Number six, he rarely, if ever, seems to want to share his thoughts or plans with you. Number seven, he seems to take the opposite view from you on almost everything you mention. And his view is not qualified by I think, I believe, I feel, as if your view were wrong and his were right. You sometimes wonder if he perceives you as a separate person. Number eight, you can't recall saying to him, cut it out or stop it. Number nine. Number 10, he is either angry or has no idea what you're talking about when you try to discuss an issue with him. So, if you've agreed with two or more of these statements, this book will help you in recognizing verbal abuse. If you've not had these experiences, it will help you support your empathetic understanding of those who have. Verbal abuse can be overt, such as an angry outburst directed at the partner or an attack along the lines of you're too sensitive, or it may be covert, hidden, as in the case of I don't know what you're talking about. When in fact the abuser does know. Covert verbal abuse is subversive because of its indirect quality. It is a covert attack or coercion. This is what crazy making is, and this is includes gaslighting, it includes denying what was said, denying what was heard. Um, yeah. So, so that was just a checklist about to help you identify if you're in this situation or to identify if someone you know is already in this situation. And prior abuse makes there are certain factors that make it more likely that you're being abused. They include your gender, your history of abuse, your history of low self esteem, your history with choosing abusive or controlling partners. They all kind of make it more likely, probabilistically, that you are being abused here as well. So, so there are two kinds of power. One kills the spirit, the other nourishes the spirit. The first is power over, the other is personal power. So, personal power is mutuality, co creation, collaboration, where you create a life together. It promotes growth, well being of oneself and the other person by clear communication, empathetic understanding. It is a consciously shared participation in life which helps one reach one's goals. Since verbal abuse is symptomatic, so it's everywhere in personal, cultural, and global problems which originate within the misuse of power. There's like we'll talk about what each of these things mean. So, power over is kind of like the way the entire world works, whether it's parents or bosses, they kind of want to use intimidation more than respect and trying to actually encourage someone in a positive way. Trying to communicate clearly what the problem is, trying to address the problem rather than trying to shame the person and saying what's wrong with you. Western civilization, Eastern civilization was founded on power over. We have power over the earth, its natural resources. We can actually wipe out our whole world if we wanted to. Total destruction. It's sad that as a race we're capable of more destruction, that we have found the ability to be capable of creation and creation at that scale in which we can do destruction. The power over model is, I believe, no longer tenable. Some of its effects and the way we're leading our lives is pollution, potential global annihilation, hunger, homelessness, prejudice, tyranny, stuff like the coronavirus. These concerns bring into sharp focus our regard for human dignity and the quality of life. The power over paradigm holds power over life. Power over life may deny the value and quality of life. Power model of control and dominance has permeated individual consciousness for thousands of years, has taken us to the brink of global chaos and crises. Our science shows us that out of chaos, new order arises. Where will the new order come from? It cannot be legislated, nor can it be established through more wars and more power over. I believe this new order can arise only out of individual consciousness. For this reason, the recognition of verbal abuse as a means of controlling, dominating, and having power over another person is of real concern to us all. Since the microcosm of personal relationship influences the microcosm of civilization, just as the civilization, its customs, culture influences personal relationship, there's this saying how the person is political and the political is personal. And basically, this means that whatever is happening in society in the grand scale, like patriarchy, racism, affects you on the micro scale, which is within your small unit of your relationship or of the dynamic you have. Mm. Um, Since the microcosm of personal relationship influences the macrocosm of civilization, just as the civilization, its customs and culture influences personal relationship, it is in our relationships that we might affect this change. So, this new order can arise only out of individual consciousness by breaking these patterns. Um, so, if so, an opportunity is present today in our everyday lives, it is the opportunity we have to value ourselves and to awaken to the way we express and protect that value in our relationships. So, control, power, dominance, lack. the illusion of power that is maintained only as long as they have an other to have power over. This kind of narcissistic empath dynamic where you don't even have to be an empath, but the dynamic of victim and aggressor is kind of how the world maintains power. And the institutions we live in, the way the systems work, they maintain power through fear, through control, through domination, through terrifying us basically into submission. Mhm. So personal power is another way of experiencing power, not needing winners and losers. So this focuses on the win-win for everyone. It's not like based on duality. It's not based on right and wrong. It's based on both parties winning, getting their needs met, which is like how positive negotiations work. Like negotiations are supposed to work versus negotiations that are built on unequal bargaining power, negotiations that are built on inequality and exploitation, where the person you're negotiating with really doesn't have power, but you're still trying to dominate them into an unfair deal because you know they are in a difficult position and you can do that to them. You have more power over them. So, mm. The verbal abuser and the partner seem to be living in two different realities. The abuser's orientation is towards control and domination. The partner's orientation is towards mutuality and co creation. They are in two different realities. So, the reality one, reality two. Dominance can control power over is reality one, personal power is reality two based on mutual cooperation. We have not reached that point where we can accept reality two, but at the same time, we are becoming aware of the dangers of reality one. Unable to begin thinking according to the new model, we live under the threat of annihilation, seemingly caught between conflicting realities. So, if we understand what happens when two of these people form relationships, we can become better at addressing them. The partner of the abuser grew up under the influence of reality one and then emerged in reality two. She might find it extremely difficult to distinguish between the two realities. Uh, she may be living in reality two and seeking mutuality without having achieved reality two self esteem, like a fish out of water, not yet an amphibian. So, a significant fact I discovered was that many women living in reality two accepted and responded to communications from reality one as if the communications are valid. So, here's an example of the interaction between Anne, who is in reality two, and Z, who she thinks is in reality two with her. We know that he isn't. You will see how Anne slips for a moment into a place between reality two, where she lives, and reality one, where Z lives. Also, you'll see how Anne assumes all along that Z is in her reality. Z walks into the room, flops onto a chair near Anne, and says casually, "Boy, are you uncooperative." He is in reality one, power over, and now feels one up. Anne, looking slightly perplexed, says, "Why do you say that?" She responds as if Z's statement were valid. So, people who have not come from abusive backgrounds do not really give credence to such statements because it's obvious to them that this person is trying to attack them. And people who are used to living in chaotic, abusive environments do not realize this and they want to give that other person the right to be heard, especially more because their whole lives they felt they weren't heard. So they try to find reasoning in what the other person is saying or doing. She responds accordingly. She thinks he is in her reality of mutual cooperation and has some reason to say you are an uncooperative person. So this Z is now ready to begin the battle for dominance and power over. To him, Anne seems open to hearing why she's an uncooperative person. He answers her question with a touch of anger and a barely discernible note of triumph. Because you didn't help me pick the fruit. Anne then feels she must defend herself. She says, "But I didn't know you were picking it." Z snaps back, "Well, I was." In his mind, he has won. He has just acted out the power over model. He has attacked Anne's basic perception of herself, and she has given credence to what he said by asking why. Z is unaware of Anne's reality. Z is feeling pretty good. Pretty good. At this point, Anne feels hurt and frustrated. She cannot seem to get Z to understand that she is cooperative. She feels some disempowerment and some confusion about what he expected, why he didn't tell her that he wanted some help picking the fruit. She doesn't realize that this whole interaction was never about picking the fruit. She doesn't perceive Z's reality at all because he often tells her how much he loves her, and to her, love means mutual empowerment, not power over. If Anne had said, I felt hurt when you said I was uncooperative, Z, as a confirmed verbal abuser, would have discounted her feeling by saying, for example, you're making a big thing out of nothing, or sarcastically, well, if that's the way you want to take it, then sorry. Anne would be left feeling hurt and confused. If Z were in reality too, Anne's reality, he would have said, oh, I'm really sorry. I guess I just wished you'd have known I was picking the fruit so I wouldn't have to ask you for help. Then we could see say Z really was being crabby, all right, but he regrets his irritability. If Anne had grown up in a reality 2 environment, she would have recognized that there could never be some reason for Z to say, you're not cooperative. She would therefore have recognized that Z was not in a reality. She would have said something like, cut it out immediately. Knowing herself to be cooperative, she wouldn't accept any disparagement, and she wouldn't be left with the frustration of wondering why she can't get him to understand. She would know he doesn't care to understand. He is more interested in I win, you lose, because after all, in reality, one, that is how one feels power. So, moving on, reality two. So, personal power comes from connection to his or her feelings, increases through cooperation and participation in life. Cooperation and participation with another person is also grounded in his or her own feelings, generate or bring into being a shared reality. This creation is the relationship itself. Both parties know their personal power. They are mutually supported and empathetic. Both live in reality too. Reality 2 relationship is certainly desirable. If you're experiencing difficulties in your own relationship, and you may be wondering, how can I make my relationship into a mutually supportive reality 2 relationship? It's important to know that one can't make this kind of relationship with another. It's a shared reality. One person alone cannot create it, it takes two. Conversely, because it is a shared reality, one person alone can prevent it, it takes only one. Cooperation with and participation in life include the involvement of oneself in the creative power of life. This generates or brings into being a personal reality which can be described as the relationship one has with oneself. Through our relationship to our creative self, we experience our personal power. We cannot access our personal power when we are unaware of our feelings. Personal power is the ability to know, to choose, and to create from the ground of one's being, from where one's feelings originate. Our feelings help us to know what we want and don't want, and what gives us our greatest satisfaction. Unless and until we have this relationship with ourselves and with the world around us, we not only experience our own creativity and personal power, but we also perceive the world to be mutually supportive. And when we have this, we perceive the world to be a mutually supportive and creative place. Thus, we describe reality in a different way than do those who would describe it as a structure of hierarchical power over, each level dominating the one below with human beings at the top. A new worldview is generated through this idea of personal power. Life naturally supports life. It emerges in mystery, splendor, and infinite diversity. The old dies away and the new is born. We grow and learn in the same way. We grieve our losses and are renewed in the process. The process of life sustains life, generates life, balances life, nurtures life, and protects life in an infinitely delicate, infinitely complex living system. So, certain things about reality to relationship is the ability to bring one's thoughts and to hear the others, express one's enthusiasm and to delight in the others, to reveal oneself and to reflect the other, to value oneself and to esteem the other, to enjoy one's creations and to treasure the others, pursue one's growth and to nurture the others, cherish one's solitude and to honor the others, follow one's interests and to encourage the other, act in one space and to accept the other space, to indulge oneself and to give to the other, to involve oneself and to assist the other, protect oneself and to comfort the other, see oneself and to behold the other, to be oneself, to let the other be, love oneself and to love the other. Of course, this is the ideal in personal relationships. The range of action and interaction varies, and there are like infinite possibilities of what is happening. Nevertheless, within that range, we may take a broad view and mark the turning point or precise instance which indicates that the threshold has been crossed between common miscommunication and definite verbal abuse. This criterion is the intention of the communicator to inform or nurture the other versus the intention not to inform or nurture the other. If the words or attitude disempower, disrespect, or devalue the other, then they are abusive. Here I use inform in the broadest sense. For example, when I ask for something, I'm informing the other person of a desire or need. When I entertain another, greet him or her, acknowledge him or her in the broadest sense, I nurture him or her. In order to recognize when one is devalued, one must have extraordinary self esteem. Someone who has reality through self esteem already knows. Sorry, so they already know respect, acknowledgement, dignity, esteem, appreciation, warmth, empathy. She has a right to all of this. Shared sentiments, kind words, attentiveness, caring, equality, accurate information, open communication, attentiveness. If she doesn't have this, she thinks when Z yells at me, it's because he doesn't realize that I really wasn't intending, saying, doing. What he says is angering him. So as soon as I explain this to him, he'll be relieved and I'll feel better too. Yeah, sure he will. Sad. It's kind of thinking that because you've just been in this reality, you want a better reality, but because you haven't been in that, you don't have the self esteem to back it up, so you can't even recognize when you're being abused. Um, when if the partner does have that reality to self esteem, the partner thinks when Z yells at me, he's dumping his toxic anger on me. I'll tell him to stop it immediately because there is no justification for his or her behavior. This partner has enough self esteem to know that she will not accept being yelled at. Of course, people make mistakes, and in reality, too, of course, people will too. However, both rest secure in their personal power, and they can therefore acknowledge mistakes and resolve upsets in a mutually supportive way. The partners of abusers may find it easier to evaluate their own relationships by using this model as a touchstone, something to which they can compare their own relationships. And as a reminder, what is possible in a relationship. So, of course, both of them are living in different realities. So, in reality, one, the abuser isn't thinking about the pain he is inflicting. He may win a battle with manipulation or convincing put down without his partner even realizing a battle has taken place. If he does feel put down and tells him, he will deny it. Physical abusers usually admit to the abuse, battering, apologizing, and saying he'll never do it again, then doing it again. Often, the domestic abuser's denial is so deep that he can minimize the physical damage to almost nothing. This intense denial may confuse and distort the victim's own perceptions. A partner of a verbal abuser who was in the process of recognizing that she was being verbally abused declared emphatically, if you've never been in a verbally abusive relationship, you would have an extremely difficult time knowing what it's like. If you're in an verbally abusive relationship, you may have never recognized it. So the abuser, of course, has declarations of love in direct contrast to the hurtful things he says. Since everyone wants to be loved, the partner is inclined to believe the abuser when he says, I love you. Why would he say it if he didn't mean it? In reality, one, love means something quite different from what it means in reality, too. All the partners I interviewed had heard two or more of the following declarations of love. Some very abusive men had frequently said them all. I'd never leave you. I'd never do anything to hurt you. I just want you to be happy. I love you. No one could love you as much as I do. So often, there are common characteristics. Of course, you don't have to have all of these, but verbal abusers often have these characteristics in common. So they are irritable, likely to blame mate for outbursts or actions, unpredictable, you may never know what will anger him, angry, intense, unaccepting of his mate's views and feelings, unexpressive of warmth and empathy, controlling. They may intimidate you to do things a certain way. They may criticize you and make fun of you and imply what you're doing, the way you're doing it, is wrong, eventually undermining your ability to do anything. Uh, Silent and uncommunicative in private, or frequently demanding or argumentative. Number nine. Number 10, a nice guy to others. Um, Number 11, competitive towards partner. Sullen, jealous, quick with comebacks or put downs, critical, manipulative, explosive. Hostile, unexpressive of feelings. So, what is lacking is equality, partnership, mutuality, goodwill, intimacy, validation in this reality one relationship, or in this person who is the abuser, that is their reality. What is present is inequality, competition, manipulation, hostility, control, negation. Why can't he accept her as an equal? Because he would experience her equality as his inferiority. He would have to ask for what he wanted. He would be open to rejection. He would have to give up control and dominance. Control and dominance seem to give the abuser a sense of power, security, and identity, usually as a male. One way to identify a relationship of inequality is to determine whether or not the couple can set mutual goals and discuss them together. In an abusive relationship, the couple does not plan anything together. Planning together requires mutuality and equality. So there may be different ways, like if you're trying to form plans with this person, they may be silent, they may be distracted, they may deliberately be distracted, they may say repeatedly that I don't want to discuss this right now or I'm too busy, but then they never come back and talk to you about it, and you're just like, what is happening? Mutuality, equality do not exist. In an abusive relationship, the partner may discover that a mate will not discuss long or short term goals with her, nor is he willing even to make plans with her for a weekend. Neither personal goals nor plans for the future together are discussed and agreed upon in a mutually supportive way. So here's an example. Bella thought it might be fun to go to a nearby lake on a certain Saturday afternoon. That morning she asked, Bert, I was wondering, do you have any plans for today? Bert turned angrily towards her. Do I have to have plans? Why no? I was just thinking we might do something this afternoon. I don't see why I should have to have plans. It's just like this person is pissed off and they kind of just want to be pissed off at you. And over time, it's like they don't even realize what they're doing. You need to like maybe record what they're doing and be like, all these phrases that I'm going to get into. Do you hear yourself? I don't accept that. That's rubbish. Stop correcting me. Stop. Please keep your comments to yourself. I'm definitely not having any fun with you. Stop that. Don't ever, ever call me names. I don't follow orders. Who are you giving orders to? You may not raise your voice to me. Don't blame me for not accepting your taunts and disrespect. That's not okay. I don't like your attitude. If this person is physically abusive, you might not even want to confront them because your life and your physical safety is in danger, and no relationship is worth that kind of having to deal with that. I don't see why I should have to have plans, he said even more angrily. What are you mad about? I never said you had to have plans. I'm not mad, just drop it. You said plans and now you're trying to get out of it, Bert raged. Bella felt confused, frustrated, upset. She wondered how she could bear feeling so badly and at the same time not be able to discuss her feelings. She knew from past experience that Bert would keep saying she was trying to get out of it. Bella said she had felt upset inside and spent some time wondering what she had done to upset him. Had she given him the impression that she had expected him to have plans, or had she somehow made him feel pressure to have plans? So just kind of like trying to figure out what was it. Could it possibly have been this? Could it have been this? Versus if you come from a very healthy, secure environment where you weren't abused, where you were not invalidated, where you were taught that your feelings matter, you matter as a person, you were given respect to have boundaries, you instantly recognize when that's happening. Um, had she somehow made him feel pressure to have plans, even when she hoped he wouldn't have any and would be free? So all these kind of like questions that create doubts in the mind of the partner who is being abused. On another occasion, Bird came in. I have to replace the decks. It'll cost X dollars. Bella, who usually paid the bills from their joint account, responded with delight. Oh, that would be nice. We don't have that much in checking right now, but we could probably get half the wood now and half later. If we don't have it, we don't have it, Bert yelled angrily. But I'm sure we can afford it. Do you want to plan a budget with me? We're not planning a budget. What about the decks? I'm not going to discuss it. You spend money on anything you want, he said. No, I don't. Besides, I'd be happy to plan a budget with you. You're going on and on. You always have to have the last word. Bella confided at this point she felt awful. She told me that she wondered how it was that she had led Bert to believe that she was trying to have the last word. She wondered why Bert would suggest that she spent too much when she knew she didn't, and always checked with him regarding unusual expenses. Why wasn't he pleased that she was willing to work out a budget with him if he was concerned about expenses? Trying to find logic where none exists. Was he still planning to replace the decks? Why wasn't she able to communicate in such a way that he wouldn't perceive her as going on and on? How could she explain to him that she wanted to support him in his plans and that she was trying to cooperate? So, the point being, your mind just tries to find reasoning where none exists. And if you are someone who has grown in this, either you have the reality one paradigm as your history, or you have reality one self esteem. If the partner does not know that the issue is inequality, she is left feeling confused. So, reality one has competition versus partnership. Both are trying to compete. The abuser's worth is derived from a sense of one upmanship and winning over, while so then there is manipulation versus mutuality. So one way of manipulating and closing off communication is to respond to the partner's attempt to discuss a problem with, I never say anything right, which is a covert way of saying I can't change and I won't discuss the issue. At other times, the verbal abuser may pretend not to understand or to have forgotten what his partner is talking about when she brings up an issue of deep concern to her. There are many ways to manipulate another person, including being friendly only when one expects to get something from the other, suggesting disastrous outcomes to another's plans, and acting as if something has been agreed to or decided that hasn't been agreed to or decided. This could be also regarding to triggers, could be regarding plans that you've agreed on and then they haven't been agreed on, and it could also be like things that weren't agreed on but they act like it was agreed on. So Ellen had gone back to school for her MA degree. She discovered that when she needed to study for finals, Ernie seemed to have very important things he needed her to do. Also, she noticed that very frequently when she was sitting and studying, Ernie would approach her and ask in a very solicitous way, expressing great concern. Are you okay, honey? Oh, I'm fine, Ellen would reply. Why? I just wondered if you were okay. This occurred many times over many months before Ellen realized how uneasy she was beginning to feel about studying, and how Ernie's implication that something was wrong with her when she studied was undermining her determination. He never made this comment if anyone else was around. Hostility versus goodwill. All verbal abuse is hostile. The partners of verbal abusers are universally dismayed to realize this. Why would he be hostile toward me? They ask in anguish. Why? I don't get it. This will become clearer later. For now, if you are with a verbal abuser, it is important that you realize you haven't done anything to make him hostile. The abuser's hostility may be expressed overtly or covertly. He may vent his anger frequently or he may never reveal it, preferring instead to manipulate and subtly control his partner. One woman observed that after manipulator had broken several court orders so that he could make her life as miserable as possible, he called her and said that if she came back to him, all her misery would end. He was in fact continuing to deny that he was the source of her misery. One of the last things that a partner of a verbal abuser may recognize is that her mate is hostile toward her. For instance, something saying like expressing concern, are you okay, honey, may, as shown earlier, actually be an attempt to stop the partner from engaging in a personal, certainly a very hostile action. Hostility is expressed directly when the abuser blasts his partner. However, every blast may be so filled with accusation that the partner may believe that her mate's anger is her fault. If she accepts accusatory blame as Dora did, in all probability she would be shocked to realize that her mate is actually hostile toward her. She may have assumed all along that there is goodwill in the relationship and that he just doesn't understand her. When there is goodwill, there is a reaching out, a conscious concern for the other's well being. Just as the partner asks, what are you angry about? The mate asks, what is upsetting you? Control versus intimacy. So, verbal abuse closes the door to true communication. Intimacy requires mutual cooperation, goodwill, openness, willingness to share oneself. The abuser cannot control his partner and be intimate with her at the same time. Intimacy is lacking if there is no equality, partnership, mutuality, and goodwill. Intimate love is fun, sexy, romantic, and inspiring. Whether you have it in your relationship has little to do with how many years you've been together, but depends instead on how often and how deeply you share yourselves with each other. Verbal abuse dominating and controlling. It's called crazy making. The sustaining of power seems to be one key factor in crazy making. Appears to be a way of asserting dominance while denying its existence or the wish for it. So, the verbal abuser refuses to discuss a problem. He prevents all possibility of resolution. He exercises control over the reality. Partners are frequently left with a sick, hurt feeling that is never really resolved. There is no feeling of closure. Upsetting incidents may reoccur in confusing flashbacks because they haven't been fully understood or resolved. So, negation versus validation. Because the abusive partner, needs dominance and is unwilling to accept his partner as an equal, the verbal abuser is compelled to negate the perceptions, experiences, values, accomplishments, and plans of his partner. Consequently, the partner may not even know what it is like to feel supported and validated. She may take this negation as a lack of common interest or as a misunderstanding. In truth, a verbally abusive relationship is more or less a constant invalidation of the partner's reality. Validation is a positive affirmation of the other, such as, yes, I understand how you're feeling. Is this what you mean? I hear you. So rather than validating, which means honoring, which means recognizing someone's feelings, accepting them, um, mirroring them back to that person, rather than rejecting, denying, criticizing, trying to find fault with them, trying to think of a way to respond in a way that the other person stops talking about it, to actually realize that, oh, I see this is how you feel, and even if you don't feel that way, I accept that this is how you feel, and let's talk about it. Let's open dialogue on this in a way that's respectful. The anguish and communication, which the confusion which the partner experiences from the abuse, is compounded by the abuser's negation and invalidation of both the abuse and its effects. So I talked a little about the effects of the abuse, the primary causes, and the primary results. I mean, are distrust. The partner begins to be the person who's being abused stops being as spontaneous, loses enthusiasm, becomes hyper vigilant, develops more anxiety, stress um, on a general persistent basis, feels that there is something wrong with her, uh, keeps soul searching, trying to figure out what's happening on a consistent basis, becoming more and more confused, reviewing incidents with the hope of determining what went wrong, loses self confidence. Your inner critic becomes more and more magnified till the point where it sabotages your entire ability to do anything. Becomes more and more doubtful of her own reality, of her own self, of whether she's a good person, um, of whether she is capable of achieving results, whether she is capable of doing anything. Her confidence sharply falls, and she starts experiencing PTSD, depression, anxiety, complex PTSD over sustained abuse, fear of being crazy. She actually starts believing this. When I was with the narcissistic abuser, he often called me delusional, when in fact he was the one projecting his own reality onto me, but he completely undermined my reality. And because I have been in reality one with my own self-esteem, with my own the environment, including my family of origin, but also like society in general, which works on reality one, which is the lack matrix, which is the lack paradigm built on fear, control, making people feel bad, not enough, exploitation, all of these, which is why I couldn't see the forest for the trees, the bigger picture. A sense that time is passing and she's missing something. A desire not to be herself, not to be too sensitive, too crazy, too vulnerable, uh, feeling that she isn't happier and she ought to be, a reluctance to come to conclusions, a desire to escape or run away, a belief that she does best, maybe what she does worst, tendency to live in the future, distrust of future relationships. So she tells herself everything will be great when he gets a job, or when his therapy starts working, or when he stops using drugs so much, when he stops drinking so much, whatever that milestone she is that she sets herself as being the primary issue why things are not working out at the moment. So let's read just this. Okay. So I feel like this book is great because it gives so many examples, which obviously I can't go into all of them, but trying to cover like a lot of the major points expressed in it. So common beliefs of the person being abused were that if she were able to express herself better and to explain what she meant, her mate wouldn't be angered by her question or thought. Um, if she didn't have this problem in perception, she wouldn't take things wrong in the wrong way. She weren't inadequate in some way, she wouldn't feel so much hurt and pain. The man who said he loved her was also sincere and caring. She assumed that her partner was the same at work or with his friends and they didn't make him mad and they had no complaints, so there must be something wrong with her. She believed she was suffering needlessly because of some lack of flaw in herself, was not particularly defined, but was instead a general sense of inadequacy derived from countless accusations. Interestingly, when a verbal abuser is berating his partner, he may actually be describing himself. One partner quoted her mate's accusations thus: "You take things too seriously, you jump to conclusions, and you see everything in the worst possible light." Actually, the partners of verbal abusers consistently seem to overlook the seriousness of their own suffering and to hesitate to reach any conclusions. They're almost universally optimistic, looking for the best, seeing everything in the best possible light. The partner believed that as soon as the mate understood that angry blasts or sarcastic put downs really hurt her, he would stop. She realized that she just hadn't found a way to explain it to him. He just doesn't get it. If he got it, he'd stop it, and then everything would be okay. So they kind of hold on to this view for years and years, and sadly, children and everyone gets involved. And then I've seen so many families, so many children who are so like they suffer from clinical depression, all of them. They have insomnia, they cannot form positive relationships. All the relationships they then have are with abusive people. Um, it just goes on and on and on and on. Um, so the partner's attempts to enhance the relationship, improve communication, find some happiness, all lead to difficulties. The more the partner shares her hopes and fears with the abuser, hoping for acceptance and intimacy, the more the abuser views her openness and weakness. The more superior he feels, the colder he becomes, and the more power over he feels. The more the partner shares their interests and goals, the more the abuser introduces a situation or judgment which throws her off balance, diverts her from them, and reestablishes his control. The more the partner brings up topics and attempts to engage the abuser in conversation, the more the abuser withholds, entertained by her attention and basking in the power he feels in getting it. The more the partner accomplishes, believing the abuser will be happy for her, the more he starts to trivialize, diminish, devalue her. The more the partner lets go of her hope for acceptance and intimacy with the abuser and relies on friends for companionship, the more angry and hostile the abuser becomes. These paradoxes demonstrate how all attempts the partner makes to grow, be whole, and to improve the relationship bring her pain and confusion. As long as the partner does not understand what is happening, she keeps going in this way. So, most partners know how they're feeling who are being abused. They're more inclined to believe their partner's version of reality and their relationship, um, how they interpret the relationship than what their feelings tell about themselves and their relationship. So, if she is upset, the partner hears, "You're making a big deal out of nothing, you're taking it all wrong." She believes him, she will experience ever increasing confusion. Recognizing and honoring our feelings is the way we recognize and honor ourselves and the spirit of life within us. For example, I feel hurt, I'm being hurt is a form of recognition. What does it mean to honor our feelings? To honor our feelings is to give such regard to our feelings that we are able to act consciously and creatively in accordance with them, to care for and protect ourselves and the spirit of life at our very center. Our feelings are complex, of course, but and they're not easy to recognize and articulate always. But then they can be expressed in destructive or non-destructive ways. Feelings, obviously. Okay, so responsibility, inadequacy, determination. So there are all these things. Comparing feeling of responsibility is awareness of one's ability to achieve the desirable state. Feeling of inadequacy calls forth awareness of one's inability to achieve the desired state. It has the opposite effect. Determination and frustration. Determination calls forth the awareness of an intention to reach the desirable state. Frustration calls forth the awareness of having been kept from reaching the desirable state with opposite effects. Affection calls forth the awareness of an inclination to share the desirable state. Rejection calls for the awareness of having been refused, makes you sad. Hope calls for the awareness that being in the desirable state is possible. Disappointment calls for the awareness that the desirable state has been not been realized. So there's a lot of these feelings: fear versus security, and happiness versus sadness, serenity versus shock. So people who are being abused tend to stay in shock and fear and sadness. So Let me move on now, because I've done a bit of that. To Let's talk about the real categories and characteristics of verbal abuse. So, verbal abuse, words that attack or injure, that cause one to believe the false or that speak falsely of one. This is a form of psychological violence, and unfortunately, most of this is carried out in a very disproportionate amount. I think it would be around 70% of this. Of course, women do this as well, but 70% of the abuse is being done by men because of the way society functions to a great deal. So, verbal abuse is hurtful, attacks the natures and abilities of the partner. So, it could be like you're a lousy driver, you're like an indecisive person, could be like you're too sensitive, it could be like you always make the wrong decisions. It may be overt, angry outburst, name calling, or covert, very, very subtle, like brainwashing. Overt is usually blaming, accusatory. Covert is more like hidden aggression, even more confusing. So, verbally abusive disparagement may be voiced in extremely sincere and concerned way. So, Ellen provides an example when he quietly and thoughtfully said, "The real reason we've never been able to discuss a book is that there are common phrases you don't comprehend the meaning of, but that the average American understands. I thought that must be why we have so much trouble in our communication. I felt tremendous pain and despair. After all, then all my pain was my fault." Verbal abuse is manipulative and controlling. The partner doesn't know it's happening. She may notice, however, that her life is going quite differently from planned and certainly less happy. The abuse is insidious, disregards, disrespects, or disvalues the partner in such a way that her self esteem gradually diminishes, usually without her realizing it. She loses self confidence without realizing it. She may consciously or unconsciously try to change her behavior so as not to upset the abuser, so she won't be hurt anymore. She may be subtly brainwashed without realizing it. As one person said, you'll never be able to tell if you're being verbally abused by what your friends see and tell you, nor by what your husband says about himself and the relationship. Please emphasize in your book how very vague and subtle and insidious it is. It's like a slowly creeping force. That's like a propaganda campaign that completely obliterates your ability to stand up for yourself or to even know what you're trying to stand up for, whether you're worth standing up for or not, especially if you've been in reality one all your life. It's unpredictable. Unpredictability is one of the most significant characteristics of verbal abuse. The partner is stunned, shocked, thrown off balance by her mate's sarcasm, angry jab, put down a hurtful comment. This comes out of the blue. It's like, whoop, what was that? It's just like the rug has been pulled out from under your feet, or you've been hit by like an emotional volcano and it just has, or a tornado that has this emotional vortex that has just dragged you down. No matter how intelligent, discerning, or thoughtful she is, she never really expects it. Nor, for the most part, can she understand why the upsetting incidents occur or how to prevent them. The verbal abuse is the problem in the relationship. When people are having a real argument about, for instance, how to discipline their kids, how much time to spend together apart, both people may feel angry, but they can say, "This is what I'm feeling angry about," or "This is what I want." And eventually there is goodwill on their parts. The issue is resolved. In a verbally abusive relationship, there is no specific conflict. It just goes on and on and on across the board. It's like, you did this, so I did this. You like you didn't listen to me, so I had to like, oh, the situation demanded me to tell you. Why do you want an explanation? So it expresses a double message, an incongruence between the way the abuser speaks and his real feelings. For example, he may sound very sincere and honest while he's telling his partner what is wrong. "I'm not mad," while sounding very angry. Or he may, for example, invite her to dinner and say, "I love you." And he says, "I can say anything I want." There are all these contradictions that come to light that are there. So it usually escalates, increasing in intensity, frequency, variety. For instance, it often starts with jokes and with withholding behavior, where the partner is silent when you're trying to speak to them. They don't want to communicate their thoughts or their future plans. Gradually, it adds on, and other forms of abuse come in. Other forms of the way in which they're doing it come in. In many cases, it escalates into physical abuse, which may also begin subtly as accidental shoves, pushes, bumps, etc., which then escalate into overt physical battering. Whenever one partner said, whenever they're standing near each other, looking at a map, for example, she would find him standing on her foot. When she complained, he would act surprised, as if he hadn't realized it, but it happened again and again. As verbal abuse escalates, the abuser may begin moving into the partner's space. One partner said that whenever she was settled in a chair with a coffee and a pillow and then left the room for a minute, when she returned, her mate had taken her chair. It did not, she said, matter which chair she had been in. He always refused to give it back. He started stepping in front of her when she was approaching the fridge or the sink. It's like all these minor things that you can't exactly pinpoint, but in entirety taken together. And if you are aware enough to be able to know all these things, it just adds up to being this way. So the categories of verbal abuse: withholding, countering, discounting. Verbal abuse disguises jokes, blocking, diverting, accusing and blaming, judging and criticizing, trivializing, undermining, threatening, name calling, forgetting, ordering, denial, abusive, anger. So withholding. If there is a relationship, then there must be more than the exchange of information. Because a relationship requires intimacy, which requires empathy, withholding is a choice to keep virtually all one's thoughts, feelings, hopes, and dreams to oneself and to remain silent and aloof, to reveal as little as possible, and to maintain an attitude of cold indifference. May go on for years or months, and then eventually the partner may conclude that he's an introvert, he's a quiet person, he doesn't like to share himself, he's shy, he, yeah, she can like form these explanations more easily than understanding the reality. So, for instance, one example is this. I heard Mel tell his brother that he wondered what a certain actor was thinking during a dramatic scene in a movie we'd seen recently. I really couldn't recall Mel ever saying he wondered about anything before. Later that evening, I told him that I'd heard him mention this, and that I thought it was wonderful that he was expressing his thoughts that way, and that I'd love to have him share that kind of thing with me. I thought now at last you'd understand I have a concrete example for him, and not only that, I also thought that his sharing what he wondered about was probably a real breakthrough for him. He'd always been so silent, except for jokes and occasional comments, that I thought he was sort of autistic. I told him that he might not have realized it, but I really was interested in his thoughts. I believe that if I told him that what he had said to his brother was the kind of thing I wanted him to share with me, he would understand and would talk to me. He never really did. What confused me more was that he said, "Oh, okay, I didn't think you'd be interested," as if he understood, but he never really seemed to understand. So another person said, Cora, I didn't know what to do. For a while there, I thought if I were somehow more interesting, entertaining, intelligent, well read, more educated, he'd talk to me once in a while. I guess I really started thinking something was wrong when I was over at a friend's and her husband came in and started telling her about a fellow he met at the tennis court. I couldn't remember Kurt sharing like that. Being with Kurt was a very lonely experience. So often it feels like you're the only person carrying the relationship or the only person investing a lot into it. And then the other person is like, there's nothing to talk about. What do you want me to say? What are you complaining about? I do talk to you. You never let me talk. Why should I tell you if I like it? You'll do what you want anyway. You wouldn't be interested. This just adds to the person's confusion. So in ways that you respond to another, you can say, "Yes, I understand. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Uh huh. Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, I've always looked at it this way. It sounds like you're saying, I'll think it over and let you know. Are you saying, oh, do you mean? What did he have in mind? Communication that engages. I was thinking, did you ever wonder what's your favorite? How did you like? What I like best about this is I feel, what do you think about this particular thing? What would you like to be doing a year from now? When you're free, would you mind talking this over with me? Guess what happened on the way to? I was thinking, so countering, and then this is like functional information. I'll be late. The light is broken. Car is out of gas. Please leave my mail here. So countering is another way. Um, how dare she have a different view? If she sees these things differently, he may feel he's losing control and dominance. Consequently, he may choose to argue against her thoughts, perceptions, or experience. Countering is one of the most destructive to a relationship because it prevents all possibility of discussion, consistently denies the victim's reality, prevents the partner from knowing what a mate thinks about anything. An abuser who constantly counters seems only to think the opposite of his partner. She cannot know what he really thinks about anything, therefore, she cannot know him. A withholder counterer is almost unknowable. I've been there. I think maybe when the weather changes. So Kurt countered Cora when Cora said, I think maybe when the weather changes rapidly from hot to cold. And he said, it's not cold, it's cool. Kurt countered Cora as if she had actually said it was cold. Uh, a verbal abuser may be so quick to counter his partner he cannot hear her or allow her to finish her thought, and suddenly he cannot discern her tone of voice. When Cora said, I think maybe Kurt could not allow Cora to have her own thoughts or her own view, when a verbal abuser counters, he does not preface his response with anything like, it seems to me, or I think, or I feel. He simply says that what his partner had said isn't so. Counters his partner's thoughts, beliefs, and feelings. If she says, seems to me that, or I feel, or I think, in his presence, usually she will be countered. Anything she says basically is struck down, and the person is compelled to do the opposite. I realized I was doing that a lot of years ago in my relationships, and I made a like conscious effort not to do that. And I feel like it's gotten much better, but of course we all do that. But the difference is if you're a verbal abuser, it's like a consistent pattern where the other person feels like everything they say is being countered to the point there is no point of saying anything. If I say anything directly or express my thoughts on something, Kurt says it's the opposite. I feel like I can't say anything without it being put down. I don't think there's anything I can say that he won't counter. What he's really saying is, no, that's not the way it is. Even about my most personal experience or something. So another interaction is Ned saying, so Nan recognized countering when she had the following interaction. She agreed with Ned, repeating a statement he'd made, and then she noticed that Ned immediately countered his own statement. She then repeated his counter, agreeing with it, and Ned countered that too. So Ned said, that lampshade doesn't go with the lamp. Oh yeah, the lampshade doesn't go with the lamp. And then he said, it does too go with the lamp. Oh, the shade goes with the lamp. You can't say it goes with it when the color's off. This is exactly what a lot of abusers do. Oh, I see, the color is off. That's not what's wrong with it. I'm trying to find out what you mean, Nan said. No, you're not. You're twisting my words around. As strange as this interaction is, it is not at all uncommon. Countering truly blocks all communication, all possibility of intimacy. So then the third way is discounting, which is denying the reality and experiences of the partner and is extremely destructive. Um, if the partner does not recognize it for what it is, she may spend years trying to figure out what is wrong with her, what is wrong with her ability to communicate. It denies and distorts the partner's actual perception of the abuse. It's therefore one of the most insidious forms of verbal abuse. So, for instance, if an article in a store is worth $100 discounted to 1 cent, that is what discounting is. And the item is discounted to the extent that it is deemed valueless, worth nearly nothing. It's completely worthless. In reality, the verbal abuser discounts his partner's experience and feelings as if they were worth nothing. So if you say, I felt hurt when I heard you say, or I don't think that's funny, it feels like a put down, or I feel bad when you yell at me like that, the abuser may discount his partner's feelings, saying something that gives her the message, You're too sensitive, you're jumping to conclusions, can't take a joke, blow everything out of proportion, don't have a sense of humor. Big deal out of nothing. Which of these sound common to you? Take things too seriously, feel too much. Imagination is working overtime. Don't know what you're talking about. You think you know it all? Looking for a fight. Twist everything around. Read things into my words. Making a mountain out of a molehill. Take everything wrong. Not happy unless you're complaining. Trying to start a fight. You always have something to complain about. You know it all. You think you do. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand what I'm saying. You see everything in the worst possible light. You take things too seriously. You don't have a sense of humor. It's not unusual for the partner to trust the abuser. She may believe, for example, that something is intrinsically wrong with her, or sense of humor, or her perceptions, leading to feelings of frustration, futility, spending hours trying to figure out how it is that she comes across the way he says she does. Not realizing that his discounting is to avoid having to take responsibility for his own behavior. Often, verbal abuse is disguised as jokes, and this is often the start of verbal abuse. So it could be like, are you easily entertained? You couldn't find your head if it wasn't attached to you. You lose everything that you have, don't you? An abuser may also startle or frighten his partner, after which he will laugh as if it were a joke. The partner says, I didn't think that was funny. They say, you just don't have a sense of humor, you can't take a joke. Or you're just trying to start an argument. These statements themselves are abusive. They do not demonstrate goodwill or interest in the relationship. The partner is usually not clear about it. Since the abuser responds with anger, the partner may believe she did take it wrong, and that is what he's angry about. She may wonder if there's something wrong with her sense of humor. The brainwashing effects of this cannot be overemphasized. Disparaging comments disguised often refer to the feminine nature of the partner, to intellectual abilities or competency. So it could be like related to um, a lot of things. It doesn't have to directly address your gender, but it can. Um, it takes a quick mind to come up with ways of disparaging the partner either crassly or with wit and style. This kind of abuse is not done in jest. It cuts to the quick, touches the most sensitive areas, and leaves the abuser with a look of triumph. This abuse never seems funny because it isn't funny. Abuse disguised as joke is a category of verbal abuse which all of the women I interviewed experienced. So I feel like this is like super common because it's like an easy way to backtrack and be like, oh, that was just a joke. It's always just a joke. It's like you get to say what you want to say, you get to not have consequences for it, and then you get to put it on the other person, like the liability for accepting that and not, like not rejecting it. It's like, oh, it was just a joke. You should be able to take it. There's something wrong with you for not being able to take it. It touches the most sensitive areas, leaves the abuser. Yeah. So, blocking and diverting. Blocking and diverting specifically controls interpersonal communication. The verbal abuser refuses to communicate, establishes what can be discussed, or withholds information. He can prevent all possibility of resolving conflicts by blocking and diverting. So it could be like accusatory, and but its effect is to prevent discussion and communication. You're just trying to have the last word. Quit your bitching. Who asked for your opinion? Did anybody ask you? Where did you get a crazy, weird, dumb idea, stupid idea like that? Quit yakking. You always have to be right. Just drop it. Get off my back. Quit giving me all that flack. That's a lot of crap. I don't see where this is going. The discussion is ended. You're talking out of turn. You heard me. I shouldn't have to repeat myself. You think you know it all? You know what I meant? You're just trying to have the last word. There can be diversionary tactics used. So, if, for instance, the partner asked, how did you spend $50,000? The abuser blocked her attempts by diverting her from the issue with accusations and irrelevant comments. When you say what happened then, just drop it. I don't need this kind of hassle. It's too complicated for you to understand. I'm sick of your complaints. How about you account for every penny you spend? I've explained it to you all before, and I'm not going through it again. All you married for me for is my money. Um, do I have to account for every penny? Don't complain to me till you're earning 200,000 a year. I am not going to try to explain to you how the corporate retirement programs are set up. It costs money to stay in business, so quit harassing me. There's no way I'm going to go through all those receipts. What are you worried about? You have plenty to spend. Okay. So, diverting invites a response from the partner such as, I'm not complaining, I'm simply asking a question. Or, but I don't know what receipts you're talking about. Through diversion, the topic is changed. None of the abuser's diversions answer the partner's question in a thoughtful and considerate way. Accusing and blaming. A verbal abuser will accuse his partner of some wrongdoing or of some breach of the basic agreement of the relationship, blaming his partner for his anger, irritation, insecurity. They can say things like, if you say somehow I feel closed off from you, the abuser says, I don't need to be attacked like that. If the abuser says, where's my wrench? I think the kids left it in the back of the car. I never asked you. What are you so angry about? You knew it was a rhetorical question. Partner says, honey, I'm really tired tonight. The abuser says, if you're not getting it from me, then tell me who you're getting it from. The partner is accused of responding to an expression phrased as a question only for dramatic effect and not to seek an answer. The abuser blames the partner for his anger by telling her that she knew she wasn't supposed to answer. The partner's communication is not accepted and she is accused of infidelity in the second one and thus blamed for the abuser's insecurity. The implication is meant to goad her into submission. So, some abusive, accusing, blaming statements. To most partners, they are very painful because usually the partner wants more than anything to assure her mate that she is not his enemy. You're just trying to pick a fight. You're looking for trouble. You're attacking me. You can't leave well enough alone. I've had it with your attacks, bitching, complaining. You always have to have the last word. Number seven, judging and criticizing. Comments which negate the partner's feelings, such as you're too sensitive, are judgmental, as are abusive jokes. The verbal abuser may judge his partner and then express his judgment in a critical way. If she objects, he may tell her that he is just pointing something out to be helpful. Of course, that's what the narcissist said. It was always to help me improve myself. But in reality, he may be expressing his lack of acceptance for her. Most verbal abuse carries a judgmental tone, for example, comments which negate the partner's feelings. Um, Statements which begin with the trouble with you is are judgmental, critical, abusive. Statements which begin with your problem is are judgmental, critical, and abusive. Most you statements are judgmental, critical, and abusive. Of course, we all tend to use you statements, especially when we're fighting. But if it's a pervasive pattern and it happens every day, multiple times, even when there's no fighting, that usually means that you're being attacked and it's completely unwarranted. And also, healthy communication requires you to not be judging, but to be more like, this is how I feel when you do this. This is how it makes me feel. You cheat, you're never satisfied, you're a lousy winner, you're stupid, you can't take a joke, you're crazy, you can't let well enough alone. How dumb are you? How stupid are you? Critical statements made about you to others are abusive. You statements turn to she statements. She's afraid of her shadow. She can't keep anything straight. She never sticks to anything. She never stops nagging. She doesn't know if she's coming or going. Critical stories about your mistakes or actual lies about you which embarrass you in front of others are abusive. She sweeps the dirt under the carpet. Every time she goes out of the mall, she forgets her wallet. Statements which criticize specific words out of context are abusive. So Cora and Kurt are getting ready for a ski trip. Cora exclaims with anticipation, I can't wait to drive up there. Kurt responds curtly, you're not driving, I'm driving. It could also be Dora comes in the family room during a commercial and asks Dean, is the program over? He replies angrily, it's not a program, it's a playoff game. The partner feels frustrated and finds herself saying, that's not what I meant. Her meaning is already known to the abuser. He's in reality one, and in this reality, making his partner wrong gives him a sense of power over her. This type of abuser is likely to frequently tell his partner she always has to be right and precise. Criticism disguised. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I know all about precision. But the thing is, like, in those instances, precision is not really important. Sure, you want to, like, maybe explain it to someone later. But the fact that you're trying to, like, clarify it, and it usually means that you're trying to tell them that what they're saying is wrong, and there is an implication about being stupid in that. Of course, it could be completely innocuous, but it completely depends on the entire range of circumstances surrounding that statement. Criticism disguised as help or advice is abusive. You should have used statements such as, you should have used, next time you should, look what you missed, I wouldn't do it that way if I were you, this would have been a better way. If you'd have dash, it would have turned out better. Wouldn't it have been better too? Trivializing. Trivializing says in so many words that what you have done or expressed is insignificant. When it is done in a frank and sincere tone of voice, it can be difficult to detect. The partner is very trusting. She may listen with an open mind to the abuser's comments and end up feeling perplexed, that he doesn't understand his or her work or interests. It can be so subtle that the partner is left feeling depressed and frustrated but isn't quite sure why. Uh, So one experience of trivializing is the other day I achieved an effect in my painting I had been striving for. That evening I mentioned to Luke that I had finally got my painting to work the way I wanted, and he said in a really sarcastic voice, "Well, isn't it nice to have something to do in the daytime?" I felt very frustrated. I could never seem to get to him to understand how important my work is to me, and that it's not just something to do in the daytime. Trivializing is confusing to the partner because if she doesn't recognize it for what it is, she believes she somehow hasn't been able to explain to her mate this kind of feeling that if I can just get through to this person, maybe there are new ways to get through to them. Maybe if I take them to this event, they'll understand how people appreciate my writing or my painting or whatever it is, and then they'll see how important it is for me, and then they're going to actually want to participate in it or respect it, stuff like that. Um, so, undermining. Undermining not only withholds emotional support but also erodes confidence and determination. The abuser who undermines his partner has usually verbally abused her in many other ways. Consequently, her self esteem and confidence are already low, making her that much more vulnerable to the abuse. Comments such as those below, which dampen interest and enthusiasm, are examples of undermining. When the partner says, "What a pretty flower! A flower is a flower." I'd like to find out if there are any. What's the point? Why bother? Who cares? I don't see that that'll get you anywhere. Direct squelches are also undermining. So, who asked you? Nobody asked your opinion. You always have to put in your 2 cents. You wouldn't understand. It's over your head. You'll never make it. You couldn't talk if your hands are tied. What makes you think you're so smart? Whom are you trying to impress? Sabotaging is a way of undermining. I was feeling really good when I told Dean that I had thought of a plot for a story I thought I'd like to write. He listened and then said, "Really, I don't know anyone who'd be interested in reading it." I sort of lost my enthusiasm. Like the studying example, just kind of losing your enthusiasm and feeling like you're doing something wrong, which is a subtle, like subtly sabotaging the partner's determination, sense of well being. Disruption and interruption is another form of sabotage. For example, the abuser may sabotage his partner's conversations with others by causing some disturbance, or conversations with himself by causing some disturbance, such as breaking into uproarious laughter, walking into the room, pounding on the piano. He may also simply interrupt her by finishing her story, opposing her, or negating her, implying to her that she is inadequate. So, if Bella says, I'll need to read this before I sign it. Bert says, Angrily, well, it seems like a simple thing to me. He implies, I can think for you, it's too complex for you. Threatening. Threatening manipulates the partner by bringing up her greatest fears. Verbally abusive threats usually involve the threat of loss or pain. Do what I want or I'll leave. Do what I want or I'll take a mistress. Do what I want or I'll get a divorce. Do what I want or I'll hit you. Do what I want or I'll really be angry. Or if you do this, then I'll do this. Name calling is one of the most overt categories of verbal abuse, which is like the emotional development of a child calling names like terrible names. Um, all name calling is verbally abusive. Forms of endearment, such as sweetheart, are of course accepted, unless said with real sarcasm. So number 12 is forgetting. Forgetting involves denial and covert manipulation. The declaration by the abuser that what occurred didn't occur is abusive. Everyone forgets what happened now and then. However, consistently forgetting interactions which have great impact on another person is verbally abusive denial. Often, after the partner collects herself after being yelled at or put down, she may try to talk to her maid about it. You'll have conveniently forgotten the incident or not remember it exactly as it happened. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not going to listen to this. This is not what I said. This is not how it went down. Some abusers seem to consistently forget the promises which are most important to their partners. Often the partner is truly counting on a very important agreement made by her mate. You will have forgotten the agreement. I don't know where you got that, or I never agreed to anything, are common forms of denial. Almost done here. Ordering denies the equality and autonomy of the partner. When the abuser gives orders instead of asking respectfully for what he wants, he is treating his partner as if she were the glove on his hand, automatically available to fulfill his wishes. So often, ordering can be followed by yelling. Um, it can be like, shut that off. We're doing this now. We won't discuss it. You're not wearing that. Get this off of here. You're not going out now. Get in here and clean this up. Get rid of this. Denial. Although all verbal abuse has severe consequences, denial is one of the most insidious categories of verbal abuse because it denies the reality of the partner. A confirmed verbal abuser may use every form of verbal abuse on a regular basis. This very same abuser might very well read this section on the categories of verbal abuse and say that he has never been abusive, that he loves his partner, and that he would never do anything to hurt her. This is denial. I never said that. You're making that all up. We never had that conversation. You're getting upset about nothing. You've got to be crazy. I don't know where you got that. These are all examples of denial. When the partner of the abuser clearly realizes that he did say that, she's made nothing up, they did have that conversation, she's upset about something, her experience is real, she's not crazy, then she has enough self esteem and knowledge to recognize verbal abuse. So after this, I'm going to, because this is a very lengthy topic, of course, it's a very complicated topic, it's very hard to recognize. So this is like gone on for a bit. So I'm gonna come back to this and basically focus on anger, which is often like related to verbal abuse, a bit about conditioning. So I feel, yeah, we did conditioning. Coming back to how we can respond to all these kinds of abuse, and then certain further implications of the abuse. So, yeah. So finally, I want to end with besides self esteem, setting limits requires extraordinary trust in yourself and your own feelings and your own perceptions. So much trust that if you are, for example, yelled at, you know that even if he thinks it's justified, you will not accept it. Even if he thinks it's a joke, you will not accept it. Even if he does not understand, you will not accept it. Even if he says it is your fault, you will not accept it. Even if he says you do not know what you're talking about, you will not accept it. Even if he says you're just trying to be right, you will not accept it. Even if he says you're a bitch, you will not accept it. Even if he says 100 things, you will not accept it, nor will you accept the 100 things. Even if you have made a mistake, you will not accept the abuse. For example, that you will not accept being put down or raged at for a simple mistake. Um, there's reality to self-esteem. You know that you do not deserve to be yelled at. It's reality to self-esteem. You know that you do not deserve any verbal abuse at all. So stay in the present, trying to dwell neither on the past nor on your concerns for the future. Become aware in the present, moment by moment, of any angry outbursts or disparagement directed at you. You will need to respond to the abuse in a new way. In the past, you may have told your mate when you were upset, hurt, frustrated. You may have told him what you were upset about, and you may have asked him not to yell at you. You may have asked him to check with you to find out what you really were saying before you got mad. You may have found that none of this was effective in stopping the abuse. Your goal is to call the abuser out on every offense. Once you have determined your limits, you reinforce them by calling to a halt every bit of abuse you hear. This is, of course, a very difficult, time, strenuous process, especially because it's so hard to understand if you are an abuse survivor yourself. Hard to be aware when you're going through like work, when you have so much on your plate. Uh, Specific responses to each category of abuse are suggested in the next chapter, which we're going to do together. Anytime, however, firm, authoritative, stop it is effective. Your authoritative response will give your mate the clear message that you mean what you say and will not tolerate any abuse. You will need to respond as soon as you hear the tone of his voice. If you become caught by the words, you will simply become confused, as did the partner. And uh, any response that is what I meant was suggest to the abuser that his reality is valid, that you are the adversary, and that he can step up his attacks, even claiming that you are attacking him. Of course, he is not justified, but he will take any explanation as adversarial and defensive. Be aware that you can leave any abusive situation. Most women had 4 out of 40 had been hit by their partners. Most had been repeatedly yelled at. Most had at one time or another thought they were about to be hit. Most said he's never hit me, but I had the rate of his anger. Carry money with you so you can pay for transportation home from wherever you are. You are a free citizen. You never have to stay where you feel uncomfortable. Carry your personal phone book with you so that you have the numbers of friends if you need to call someone. It's very important to have a support network. If you don't, try to rely on your immediate family if they are helpful, if someone you know, if a friend you think would actually be there for you in an emergency. Keep their number handy and carry it with you. If you're out at a party or restaurant, staying in a hotel, and you're being yelled at, put down, etc., and you find that saying stop it does not put an end to the abuse, simply leave. If you feel for any reason you do not feel comfortable remaining, this is your right and your responsibility to yourself. Keep a bag packed in your car if you have your own car, or else in a safe and easily available space so that you know that you do not have to stay where you are subject to any kind of abuse. Plan ahead where and how you will go if you need to leave your residence. These steps will give you a sense of control over your own life and help to alleviate the fear of being hurt one more time. Ask for changes that you want in your relationship. Intimacy in a relationship requires a mutual intention to communicate, to understand, to respond appropriately, as well as the intention to support the other emotionally. Setting limits is a way to ask for change. You may also ask your mate to discuss with you other changes you may desire. How much time you need to spend to yourself and how much time you'd like to spend together, how to jointly manage finances, making plans together for the future, setting aside a special time each week to discuss current issues in the relationship. Um, so, I'll go into some difficulties you may encounter. You may feel guilty or at fault if you are, or as if you are betraying your mate by discussing your concerns about your relationship with an outside party. You may even feel that reading about verbal abuse may harm your relationship. You may have these feelings if you've been conditioned to believe that your difficulties are pain are your fault. You may also be conditioned to feel wrong about setting limits and refusing to accept abuse. So, for example, phrases such as "you're just looking for trouble" or "you're always trying to start something" may condition you to believe that the abuse is your fault and that you are making things worse. If you are with a verbal abuser and are resolved to set limits and challenge your mate on any infringement, you may continue to meet with intense denial. In this case, remember that a verbal abuser defines his partner and the interpersonal reality. He also defines himself as being right and non abusive. It is important, therefore, that you completely accept your own perceptions and your own feelings. When you can define your own reality as separate and different from your mates, you gain clarity, self esteem, and autonomy. Knowing that what the abuser has told you about yourself is not at all true but is in fact abusive can help you recognize how your mate has attempted to define you in terms of his reality. One way to become aware is to turn that statement around, like, I know that I'm not competitive, selfish, a bitch, attacking, trying to have the lost words, too sensitive, trying to start a fight. So I'm going to go a bit more into this when I come back. Hope that was helpful. I feel like if it helped even one person, it's totally, totally worth it. So see you guys soon.